Thank you very much for coming. Yeah, my name's Isaac, this is Sonny.
And yeah, together we're Couple Sounds, and mainly Bristol-based sort of artist duo, but also collaborate with other artists and designers and anyone who wants to work with us, basically. Get involved.
So I think we'll do a little history about how, like, where we started and then how we kind of got to where we are now.
We started off by we played DJ sets, basically. So we made copper etching plates using
basically I was like learning how to DJ and like buying all these records, and then started thinking about how do they work, you know, like how do records work, how is there like drums in there, how is there like a full orchestra in this like bit of plastic, how does that work, could I make my own records? And I was working at a print room doing lots of etching with lots of students, doing lots of sort of tutorials and stuff like that. And lots of students would kind of use this bit of copper to do an etching, sort of like Rembrandt and Goya and things like that, and then would just leave this bit of copper, and it's like there must be a better use of this bit of copper rather than just taking a few prints of it and then leaving it. So I started wondering, what would it sound like if you put it on a record player, and like, could you make, instead of making an image of it, could you figure out what marks make what sort of noises rather than like a visual representation? So these are some records we made.
And at the same time, I was making silicon molds of vinyl records with the idea of how people at the time were like almost like pirating digital music. But it's like, could you pirate physical music, make reproductions of records, and then through the process of mold making, like Isaac said, that tiny groove on a record contains, you know, this tiny little valley that goes up and down, left to right, and it contained the human voice or a full orchestra or, you know, any sound. And the information as a physical thing, and what was lost and gained through mold making and turning it into a different material, what sounds were gained and lost and that sort of thing. And we realised we were kind of doing the same thing, and then we started working together and brought those two aspects together.
Well, and we were actually working together as our job as well, weren't we?
Yeah, we were doing 3D printed ceramics as like processing those in a place. So we were working together and being like talking about each other's work, and we were like, why don't we just start doing it together? So these are the
prints that we took from the etching plates.
And these are we use all the language of the sort of music industry. So these were our records. So the copper plates are the dub plates, which are the original cut vinyl record that records are made from. They're like almost the master. So the copper plates are what we play, and they were our dub plates we played live. And the records were our LPs that we'd sell to other people.
And we do, people press a certain amount of vinyls, don't they? So they do like 300, and we did a similar thing with prints. Obviously not 300, but we do a run of 20 of these prints, and sort of saw this relationship between the two processes.
And then my background is predominantly in ceramics, so then we're putting these flat discs that have physical sound onto record players. Now we want to put the ceramics that I was making onto the record players as well. So it was sort of we love process as well, and just making stuff. So it was like and also learning those processes, I think. Yeah, learning how to do them. So it's like slip casting and doing strange experimental slip casts, and then just having this outlet, anything we made, stick on a record player and see what it sounded like. So these are CNC molds, plaster molds of two different vases that then go together, and then some sort of a modular mold of plaster blocks that you stack all together and pour the slip in, and then every time you tried to remake that mold, it would always be different. And then some throne pieces, especially the throne pieces, was related back to sound using chattering, because that, you know, the traditional technique of chattering on the side of a pot is a frequency, the tool bouncing, so that's a frequency, sound is a frequency. Could that movement then be turned into sound? And I think also we heard these rumours about these Egyptian pots, which you could hear sort of ancient Egyptians, if you played them at the right speed and had the right tool on it, you could hear like ancient Egyptian people like still talking, because they were using this chattering method, and through that it was recording their voices into these pots. It's not true.
It's not true.
But it was a cool idea.
Yeah, we're like, yeah, let's do that.
And it was like Greek vases, and it's like, can you hear Homer speaking?
Yeah.
It's not true, but it's a cool idea, and we liked it. And then also using facets, so cutting facets into pots in specific areas to create rhythms as it goes round. So these were played on turntables with contact mics and things hanging off the contact mics, which is like a normal microphone, but it needs physical direct strike to make it
Well, like
sound.
normal microphones pick up the sound vibrations in air, whereas contact microphones pick up vibrations in an object.
So then we were cutting facets, so we'd have like 3 on one side, then 1, and then 1 on the other side. So you'd get, like, when it's spinning around the table, you get 3 hits, then a break, then 1, 3 hits, 1. So then that starts to create almost like a beat as it goes round.
And because it's the same thing going round and round and round, this rhythm becomes a rhythm because it's the same thing going over and over again.
And that's us, Isaac at our first ever show. So it was a thing called Sanctum in Bristol, which was the artist Fiesta Gates.
Yeah.
He did, it was a venue in Bristol, an old church with no roof. So it's quite full circle. That was our first ever gig, and now we're here in another church.
Yeah, wow.
But you got moved up in the world. But he built a structure within this church, and it was 24 days of 24-hour music. So you could go to this venue at any point, and there'd be something on. And basically,
anyone that applied to be in it was allowed to. Yeah.
So they weren't vetting anyone.
Yeah.
So that's how we got in.
And because we were mucking about this stuff in the studio, and we were like, we need to do this somehow.
Yeah.
And so I booked us a gig. Well, I applied to do it this thing, and they said yes. And so I said, well, I came into work one day. I was like, we're doing a gig. We're going to have to make it good enough.
Yeah. And it was pretty horrific.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to play the pots, what we did at first of all was we would dismantle turntables, and the bit that actually plays the record, the tone arm, we took that off a turntable, and I sat there the whole gig holding this arm against the side of one of our pots. I literally just sat on a chair doing that while you did all the other DJing stuff. So I was quite. But it's developed since then. So a big part of that was basically the kind of fake it till you make it idea that in Bristol there's a really big experimental music scene, and we were like, how do we get in on that? And we thought they were all the people within that were really cool, and we were like, want to be mates with them. So we basically, and from having a fine art, both of us studied fine art and putting on your own exhibitions, we're like, we'll put on our own events, and like
we'll get loads of people who we like who are doing really good stuff, but we'll headline.
So we put ourselves as a headline act on every, which is obviously not shameless, but until we eventually convinced, like, people would like
then
be
start
like,
booking us.
started booking us, and so that's how we sort of got in there. And we were also part of different collectives and different spaces in Bristol. So when I was a year above Isaac at uni, when I graduated, me and a group of mates started a place called Loft 60, which was an artist space, gallery space, studios and fabrication area. And then
I did a similar thing. We kind of rented a warehouse and used it as studios.
Copied us, basically.
Yeah, but better.
And then there was the Brunswick Club, which was
basically after a while of being in Champ, some other collectives got in contact and said we should do something together. So we found this building called the Brunswick Club, which was this old working men's club, which they'd gone bankrupt, so they left, and it was this empty building that we were allowed to take over. So it's like this 4-story building in the middle of town that had basement with skittle alleys and dance floors and stuff, and about 50 of us all moved in and just ran it as this sort of collective collectives, and it was the most amazing space ever.
So that we got to put on loads of nights for that.
Oh yeah, we basically got to put on our own nights for free. So whoever wanted to put an event on, you just put this event on, and loads of people just kind of built this amazing community of people who are interested in weird stuff.
So yeah, we did it enough to people started asking us to play and everything else, and then we got asked to do a Static Materials, which was a tour. The main person was Keith Harrison, ceramicist, and we were the support act. So we were the support DJs for that.
The tour DJs.
Tour DJs, yeah. So yeah, basically that was almost like the culmination of that was in 2018, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And we'd already been doing Copper Sounds for 4 or 5 years.
Maybe 19.
Yeah, doesn't matter. But we were doing Copper Sounds for quite a few years before that, and it felt like this was the sort of pinnacle of us doing stuff on turntables. And that after doing it, we did 8 venues in 8 days all around the UK, and we did a workshop at every venue as well. So we were like frazzled by the end of it, and we were like, maybe we need to stop putting stuff on turntables, and we don't want to just be pigeonholed as the people that put stuff on turntables. So yeah, we got some really good photos from it, and our work looked better than it had before, so that was great. And we started to make much bigger, so you can see in the last slide, in the centre, which got nicknamed the Doner Kebabs. They were sort of the biggest ceramic pieces we'd made to that date, sound pieces. So it was kind of, yeah, that was the starting point for making larger works. And
well, I think you were interested in this like mold making technique, weren't you?
Yeah, so it's kind of basically a wooden mold that made in 4 parts, and it was modular as well, so it could be flipped over and made in a few different versions. And while we were on that tour, we kind of came up with the idea of sequence ceramics. So knowing that we didn't want to put things on turntables anymore, it was a bit of a sort of, back of a fag packet drawing of like these pots with mics going to them, and some sort of they'll get hit. And then we got some funding through Help Musicians UK. So we'd never really been successful at getting funding, and the time that we stopped applying for art funding and applied for music funding, saying we're musicians, and it was called the Fusion Fund collaborate with artists to help you. So we were the musicians, and we collaborated. Basically, at the time I was running a thing called Wiltshire Ceramics Studio, and we had 2 other studio members, Millie Hardy and Tom Blackstock, and we collaborated with those to produce the ceramics you see here today. So all 4 of us would work on them all together, developing the ideas and everything. And then the other person we collaborated was a guy called Chris Ingram, who's part of Knoll West Media Centre. He's got an engineering background and is a whiz with Arduinos and stuff like that, and he helped us make the electronic aspect of the installation, which is a sequencer that triggers the beaters. So that's sort of how it came about, and yeah, we started to scale up our work and try and make bigger, more ambitious pieces.
Well, I think we had like a massive kiln. We wanted to make the sort of biggest thing we could in the kiln.
Yeah.
And what was this technique was called something?
Well, it's kind of a weird hybrid of trying to do a bit like an ongi pot, like the Korean pickling jars where they have the big, like a coil pot basically. They've got the massive coils, and they're applying it on a turntable. But it's also like knowing your skill level. We knew we could make large ceramics, and we'd done different aspects, but this was new, and we were going for this big pot, and it needed to go right for time-wise and everything. So it was using the coil-built technique and the ongi pot kind of thing, but also we had like sledging, like you do in plaster work. So we had a profile cut out that's on the wall on the side here, which was on hinges that we screwed into the wall, so we could bring that across and make sure our profile was developing as we wanted it, and sort of bring it into shape a bit. So yeah, the bell is the largest piece that we made for this, and the big bowl as well.
This is the sequencer, which we were developing with this guy called Chris Ingram, and we kind of wanted to make something that could play the ceramics, so we didn't have to sit there and sort of press the buttons. And a sequencer is a kind of it's like you use them for drum machines and various bits of music normally, but we wanted to kind of design our own that could make sort of more experimental rhythms, or these rhythms that were inspired by sort of minimalists like Philip Glass and Steve Reich, and do this thing called phasing, where you can play two rhythms at the same time. They're exactly the same, but one is slightly slower or faster than the other, and they sort of go out of time with each other. And even though you're playing the same rhythm, because they're going out of time with each other, it sort of creates these new rhythms. And so if we just had something that was quite repetitive, I feel like we'd get quite, well, repetitive. But by being able to sort of change the tempo of each individual sequence, you can make it feel less repetitive and a bit more organic, hopefully. So this was what it looked like to start with, and now this is what it looks like now.
Yeah, so you can see there's the 7, these are basically the 7 pots, and across there are the 16 beats within a cycle. And you can reduce, the red colour is us reducing down the number of beats in that cycle, so you can go from anywhere from 8 to 16, so you can have separate number of beats. And then, yeah, like you said, the tempo of each one can, so normally on those sequences you have a global you know, tempo, so they're all within, but these ones, like Isaac said, can be changed individually.
Yeah, because with sequences like this, normally it's quite easy to sort of end up making sort of very repetitive sort of techno music, basically, and that's not what we wanted to do. So we wanted to use the kind of idea of a sequencer, but use it in a way that is not repetitive, basically.
And then, yeah, basically we got to culminate. So because of COVID and everything else, it was a very drawn out project. We did a lot of the ceramics, and then couldn't do any more, and we couldn't develop the sequencer. So we had the ceramics for ages, and even some of them were was in my garden.
Oh, yeah, in your garden,
the big bowl became a pond, and we had newts living in it and stuff over lockdown, which was quite nice. And then cleaned them all up. And we got to do a residency in a venue called Strange Brew in Bristol.
This venue was like just starting up, and they had this massive back room which they didn't really know what to do with yet, because they kind of sorted out the front room, but they were eventually going to make the back room into a sort of club. They hadn't really got around to doing it yet, so we said, can we do a residency? Well, they kind of asked us, and we kind of suggested it at the same time. And so during this residency, we kind of put all the things together. So we put the sequencer, well, kind of finished the sequencer, and then kind of finished putting the beaters together, made these frames out of loads of scaffold, like poles and clamps and stuff, which is quite weird because that's what they use here, so it all worked quite well. And so I spent about a month sitting in this back room with no windows, just like putting all these electronics and things together. And then I think it culminated in a few performances, and then it was just on in the back room for a couple of weeks.
So that was us being able to test it basically without a studio space big enough to do that. It was, so that was really lucky that we got to test run it and make sure it all worked, and the idea and all the electronics before being able to do it here.
So we did quite a lot of that to start with, didn't we?
Yeah, we made smaller models and sort of like the bell was first sort of designed. Well, the bell's like a traditional Western bell, basically. It's based on that profile. But we did. There was a throne version of it first, but much smaller scale, and you can kind of get an idea. But until you scale it up big, it's not going to resonate the same. And I guess it's the way these are hit. So there's some which are directly struck and they've got contact mics on them, and then it's about the clay resonating. And obviously, depending on how high you fire the clay and the clay body, it can affect the sort of sound. Like, you know, the difference between hitting a bone china cup and a earthenware cup. The ring is different. And then there's other vessels which we call the trumpets, which are almost like the open-ended vases on their side, and they are about the air moving through that chamber. So obviously the different shape, and those are really each, you know, essentially they're roughly the same length, but just different shapes, and they make very different sounds.
But it's almost like it's hard to know what it's going to sound like. When you make something small scale, it doesn't really make. It does make a sound, but you can't really tell the sort of intricacies of what is happening until you scale it up. So it's almost like now we've made these, we've learned, like we've made these big big ones. We've learned so much. We kind of need to go back and make some more now.
Yeah, and also like with the space thing of like, yeah, it's the nature of it being a sound piece as well, and it's so different wherever you set it up. So it's like even you know, like when we tested it in Strangebury when it was set up, they were spread further apart, and it was a you know, it was a club, so it was sound insulated and low ceiling and stuff like that. So it was a completely different sound to how it sounds here. And I guess, yeah, the acoustics of a space is always going to make the work quite different, and the space you've got to set it up in as well. So, I mean, there is that, because we kind of dabbled with both of. There's a very traditional, yeah, like I said, Western bowl and a Western bell,
And the bowl.
and a large bowl. But then there's the two upright ones, which we call the gongs, which are, you know, they're not.
I guess
not
they were
gongs.
all sort of inspired by instruments that already exist. Like we said, there's the trumpet ones, which aren't played like trumpets, but they were kind of inspired by the shape of trumpets. And then, yeah, the bells and the bowls are obviously more to sort of resonate as much as they could, because we thought, well, there's obviously a tried and tested method with these shapes already, even though it's in different materials, so like bronze normally. There's obviously a tried and tested method, so what would happen if we make them in ceramics? With the glazing thing,
I don't think the glazing makes that. Obviously, if you're striking something on the surface, it'll probably sound a bit sharper with a glaze on top than an unglazed. But I don't think it's making huge amounts of difference. I think it's the firing temperature that makes the big, how, you know, the denser it is and the harder it is, the more it's going to ring, kind of thing.
But then I do think with the trumpets, I think that if they're glazed inside, the sound will sort of reverberate around because it will bounce more off the shiny surfaces. So I think with the trumpety looking ones, I think because they are glazed inside, the sound echoes more than if they weren't glazed, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like we said, I think because, yeah, we just looked at what instruments there are out there and sort of based the shapes on things that already existed, I guess.
That
But-
made it up a bit
Yeah.
as we went along, I think.
Yeah,
there was
yeah.
a bit of that. But it was kind of, yeah, it was just like, these aren't, I don't think these are the final conclusion. Do you know what I mean? It's like we can keep making bigger ceramics now, and now we've got this system. And like Isaac said, it was only once we made them bigger can we really understand what's actually. So it's been a massive learning curve of
Yeah.
making these pieces. And I think, yeah, we've learned a lot more from making these than we did any of the smaller pieces to, yeah. So we've had a few ideas. We quite like want to make some larger pots that maybe has more is being struck by more than one beater per pot.
Or maybe people.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
people hitting them, so people playing them. So we're predominantly working in ceramics, but we have also recently been making bronze bells and doing foundry work to make experimental, bronze bells basically that don't really look like bells. And I think combining the two could be interesting because obviously the bronze resonates for so much longer. And we've had a guy play those, a drummer play those basically. And I think as well with the vessels, we've got, we bought ages ago and never really did anything with it, hydrophones, which are underwater microphones. And then with the ceramic vessels, potentially filling them with water and seeing how the noise resonates through the ceramic and the water, and do stuff like that.
And maybe like other sort of playing techniques, getting someone else to play them, or you can get different sorts of these speakers called transducer speakers, which you kind of attach to a surface, then it sort of makes that surface into a speaker. I think you can get them for tables and stuff like that. But yeah, getting the different types of speakers which would maybe play them in a different way.
that's what's quite nice about the turntable stuff is as well, like, because we'd have things that were found objects that would vibrate, and them spinning, yeah, you obviously get, it throws the sound a bit, and like on old electronic organs, they have the...
Yeah, was it like a tremolo or something?
Yeah, the speaker that spins and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, we were looking at these like bell plates which people spin, which you can hold and spin round, I think, and the sound goes like.
Yeah, they're like Tibetan bells, which are flat.
Oh yeah.
I think they're called Tibetan bells. They're flat triangular bronzes, and yeah, they hit them and spin them, so you get the wah 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 sound from it, which is something we wanted to do when we're doing the bronze casting as well.
But it's also very much led by technique as well. Like you've kind of found this new technique where you make things with the rope, and you like really want to try this out. It can maybe be a way for us to make stuff.
Yeah, I don't know what it's a French technique where they have a wooden structure, and then they wrap it in rope, and then you put the clay on and use a profile like we did with the bell, and you can make really big pots without having to throw them. Because I think the learning curve of trying to throw big pots might be a bit time consuming for us, but there's other techniques we can sort of hack. That's what we always do, sort of, pull on our strengths kind of thing. So we're going to look at, that's how I want to make the bigger pots, I think it translates into rope jars, but I don't know what that would be in French, because French isn't very good, but that's the technique. And you basically collapse the wooden structure out, and then you pull out the rope, and you're left with the form. So that's something I want to try.